The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events, the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazines. Thanks for watching today. We're trying to help you get through all of this with some videos to get you inspired and to teach you a few things. We thought today we'd go back to a classic from Johnnie Liliedahl. This one is called Drawing for Painters.
Welcome to Illuminations, a program of study designed to guide you through the basic tools one needs to become a better painter. We intend to shed light on the theories, tools, and techniques that provide this foundation. Many of the subjects we will explore seem to confuse even experienced painters when they're trying to do everything at once. Every stroke applied to a painting must exhibit the knowledge of composition, color, value, edge, linear and aerial perspective. That's a tall order for a beginner, yet that's exactly what many try to do when they start painting. Actually, all of these concepts are simple to understand when they're studied out of the context of trying to execute a painting. Join me for the entire Illumination series for a good basic introduction to the theory, tools, methods, and techniques every painter can use. However each of us comes to the activity of painting, we usually think that it's defined predominantly by the manner of application and surface appearance of the finished painting. We're engaged by active brushwork and entertained by beautiful color relationships. As viewers and appreciators of art, the framed painting can draw us into the subject and let us participate in the final act of a painting's performance, connection with the viewer. Actually, the impact of a painting is established long before color and texture become a part of the equation. This is frequently overlooked by beginning painters, anxious to wield their palette knives and brushes with fat, juicy strokes of color on the canvas. Just as the fancy ornaments on a building may call attention to its architecture, they may have nothing to do with the foundation and underlying structure that supports the building's facade. A painting is very much like a building in that respect. Its structure and solidity may be disguised by the virtuosity of the surface, making the viewer think it's great because of masterful brushwork and color, while its true impact lies in something much simpler, like division of space and value relationships. Drawing and its concepts are the foundation and framework upon and around which a strong painting is built. Without an understanding of its importance and use, applying paint to canvas is an exercise symbolizing very little. Many think that drawing is simply the accurate rendering of an object. Undoubtedly, that's part of what drawing is about, and it certainly is necessary if you wish to create artful drawings as an end in themselves. But more than that, drawing is a way of organizing your creative thoughts and expressing them in any color or medium. Even abstract painters must have a knowledge of drawing concepts to compose interesting paintings. Drawing and rendering the likeness of an object are not the same thing. Drawing is the artful, pleasing, and interesting arrangement of the masses in a composition. To begin our study of drawing, let's break it into parts and look at each separately, and then how they relate to each other. Our goal is to divide a two-dimensional surface into an arrangement of shapes that represents a three-dimensional scene or object. In painting, we have 4 tools to translate what we see onto the flat surface of the canvas and have it look like it has space and depth. Those tools are line, mass, perspective, and color. The first 3, line, mass, and perspective, are drawing tools. Color is an enormous subject all by itself, and we have and will explore it in many other programs. It's useful as an introduction to drawing and composition to eliminate the effects of color in creating depth and space, so that the other concepts can be fully explored and appreciated. We'll look at the abstract concepts of line and mass and how they relate to the landscape, and then we'll begin to study some of the individual components of the landscape. Today's program will look at the big picture, including the dominant earth forms of sky, ground, hills, and trees. We'll discuss water, reflections, and rocks after we understand the 4 dominant masses. The study of trees is another big subject and deserves more in-depth treatment than we can devote to it in this program, so please refer to another program in the Illumination series for discussion of how trees are drawn and painted. Line drawing is an art form of its own, some of which can be used by painters. Lines have expressive properties identified with their direction, speed, and weight. There are 4 basic types of lines: horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and curved. Each has a psychological impact on the viewer that's useful for the painter to know. We know that colors can affect our state of mind or stimulate our appetite, which is why pastel colors have a calming effect on the senses and bright colors excite and agitate us. Well, so do lines. Horizontal lines are passive and imply stability, solidity, and stillness. We see these in landscape forms of flat fields, distant vistas, and ocean horizons. The vertical line is authoritative, suggesting power, reverence, or awe. These qualities can be found in trees, architecture, and barriers. The diagonal line represents movement or rhythm and can be found on any of the earth planes. The closer the diagonal is to horizontal, the slower and calmer the movement. The steeper the angle of the diagonal, the faster the speed of the line and more tension that is created. Curved lines describe living things, as well as earth forms. It is found in clouds, foliage, figures, and flowers, just to name a few. The curved line applied to earth forms is a convex shape. That is, it bulges outward and upward. Even sheer cliffs exhibit the rounding at the top surface. The concave curve usually represents water, or the effects of water. Consider the concave shape of the sides of the Grand Canyon. The spectacular canyon walls were caused by water erosion. The arrangement of these 4 types of lines is part of the drawing process. and you can learn to use their properties as elements that will pull your viewer into the world you create in your paintings. Everything you put into a painting has a direction of movement, so you're using the properties of these elements whether you intend to or not. Better that you be in control of them than be controlled by them. So how can you use line? 1. Create a calm, serene feeling with horizontal lines. 2. Create excitement, movement, and rhythm with diagonal lines. 3. Create power and tension with vertical lines. And 4. Create the illusion of living things with the curved line. While painters frequently employ some limited use of line, more often they're concerned with masses because few lines exist in nature. Most things we see around us are described as volumes that have a three-dimensional quality. The only time we see something that approaches the quality of a line is in the wire on telephone poles, or the rigging on sailing ships, or the markings on highways. Most everything else we encounter is a shape or volume. So, why do we even consider the qualities of line? Because masses have the same qualities as line. The line is used initially by the painter to divide the canvas into its separate masses, rather than a discrete shape by itself. If we're painting a landscape, the line will usually divide the canvas surface into sky, ground, trees, and other earth forms, at which point we no longer see the divisions as lines, but as masses. If we're painting a still life setup, we divide the surface of the canvas into the group of objects in the arrangement and the background. Again, the lines no longer function as a linear tool, but describe the boundaries of the masses and the division of space. Masses have several things in common with lines: weight, direction, and psychological impact. In drawing, the weight of a line is determined by its thickness. A thick line has more visual weight than a thin line. The weight of a mass is determined by its value. Dark values have more visual weight than lighter values. A small number of interestingly shaped dark masses can be visually balanced by big, medium, and light value masses. So what this tells us is that the dark shapes are the most important because they have such an impact on us. Dark values are used to define and create a center of interest, especially when combined with a light value. Most people think that we see the light values first, but only when they're combined with a dark value to create great contrast. Dark values attract the eye anywhere in the composition, so it's important to be careful in their placement. Medium values are used in the composition to add balance to the darks. Light value can also balance the darks if they're large. For our purposes today, we're going to look at these values as they apply to the landscape masses and see how they combine to make pleasing compositions. Lines have direction: horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and curved. Masses also have direction, although a single mass may have more than one descriptor. For instance, a mountain may have a horizontal base and a diagonal surface. The diagonal would imply direction, while the horizontal would suggest stability. The ground may be represented as a large rectangular mass that is basically horizontal, It suggests a peaceful, tranquil presence. If we subdivide the mass with a group of diagonals that create the edge of a road or a river, we introduce tension and movement. Vertical lines in masses create great tension when they intersect other lines in masses, especially the horizontal mass. We're drawn to these intersections very strongly, so it's important for the painter to know when to use or avoid intersections in their compositions. Convex lines and masses suggest earth forms. Living things and the accoutrements of living things. They can be lyrical, playful, or pendulous. Concave lines and masses suggest watery, liquid masses. The curved shapes can be the most interesting in a composition. Painters are more concerned with masses as a rule, so let's turn our attention to those. In drawing, one needs only 3 or 4 values to create a design. Remember, the drawing is the foundation the painting is built on, not the end result. The strength of the painting rests on this solid beginning, so the simpler and more understandable it is, the more impact the painting will have. Although you can draw in any medium and in color, we're going to limit our palette to black and white, both in paint and in pencil or charcoal. Color has dynamic and psychological properties all its own, and we don't want to confuse those with any of the drawing concepts. Some of the illustrations I'll use are in paint, while others are in pencil or charcoal. The medium doesn't matter. The concepts are the same across the board. You could do everything in this program with pencil, ink, charcoal, watercolor, acrylics, pastels, or oils, and the basic issues would be the same. To begin, we'll start with a bare surface, either a drawing pad or a blank canvas. We'll use its blank white surface as one of our basic values, so everything we add to it will be darker. For simplicity, let's use only 3 other values: light, medium, and dark. We usually think of a pencil when the tools of drawing are required. It's the cheapest and most available, and one of the most expressive of drawing mediums. A soft 6B pencil is what I'll use today because I can make dark values more easily with it. 6B pencil is a 6B pencil. It's a soft 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 6B penc Sometimes charcoal is the medium of choice. A nice, soft, square stick makes rich strokes, but it's the dirtiest of all drawing tools. I'll use paint for some of the demonstrations today, just to emphasize that drawing is a painter's tool that is to be used with the brush much more than the pencil or charcoal. It helps to see how drawing is used in the painter's own medium, so you don't become confused by different techniques that are unique to a different drawing tool. Today I'm concentrating on drawing concepts that relate to the landscape. In a companion video in this series, we'll study still life in depth. While many of the concepts we'll explore in a moment also apply to still life painting, there are some important ones that do not. Drawing and painting out of doors has its own unique set of rules, and they differ in important aspects with still life painting indoors. Please refer to the other video in the Illumination series, Drawing 2 for Painters, for additional study of drawing as it applies to still life. To further narrow our discussion, let's consider only natural masses in the landscape. We'll ignore for the moment any man-made structures or objects and any variations in the landscape that can be attributed to man, such as highways, fences, ditches, etc. Whenever we introduce the effects of man into the equation, we have a multitude of variables that affect basic value masses. The value of a mass in a landscape speaks a language of its own, and it's a language that we all intuitively understand. We already unconsciously associate certain values with dominant elements in the landscape because we've observed these relationships all our lives, mostly never paying any attention to them. Because they are so consistently the same, day after day, we don't recognize their importance in our understanding of that language. The values we see in daylight hours are fairly consistent because of the unfailing consistency of the light that illuminates the earth. To understand the values of common landscape elements, we need to understand how they relate to the ever-present source of light, the sun. Rain or shine, the sun is the source of light every day of the year. If you can see outdoors, it's because the sun is out. It's fairly obvious that the sun is the source of light in a landscape and that it's located somewhere in the sky above the earth. What is not so obvious is that every landscape in daylight is also illuminated by a second, intensely strong light. And no, it's not the moon. This second light is the light that is reflected back to Earth by the particles of moisture and other matter trapped in our atmosphere. The reflected light from the sky has a dramatic effect on the values of ordinary earth forms that we take for granted. The lighting situation is the greatest difference in painting outdoors and painting in the studio from a live setup. In the studio, you have only one source of light, and you can control its direction and intensity. Oh, sure, you can introduce a second light source if you wanted to, or a third or a fourth, but that doesn't usually improve a composition. Quite the reverse, it usually kills it or confuses it at the very least. So it's desirable to keep the number of light sources to a minimum when you can control them. Digressing into still life lighting for just a moment to make a point. You might be thinking, well, don't you have more than one light source in the studio? Aren't there lights in the ceiling and also a spotlight on the setup? The answer is yes, in some cases. but that's not the ideal setup. The lucky painter who has a studio with a north light window has the most desirable situation. With no artificial light, a north-facing window can illuminate the setup, the canvas, and the palette with the same color and intensity of light, providing the painter with the easiest environment to judge color and value in his painting. But what about the painter that doesn't have the luxury of a north light? Well, that would include me. My studio has no windows at all, not because I wouldn't like to have a window, but my north wall is butted up next to another building. I could have windows in either the east, south, or west, but that would be the worst situation to be in. In the northern hemisphere, the sun travels across the equator to the south of us, creating a steadily moving light all through the day. As a still life painter, the worst thing that can happen is for the light to change. Better an artificial, absolutely still light than one that moves constantly. Not only does the sun move, but the color of light changes from morning to afternoon. This causes the colors you see in your setup to also change. You can imagine how difficult it would be to paint a setup whose colors are changing by the hour. To solve that problem, we studio painters devise ingenious ways of controlling the light. First, I use the same color of light in my ceiling lights as in my spotlight for the setup. Mine are color corrected to 5000K. To eliminate the ceiling light from confusing the spotlight on the setup, I create a sort of stage with a three-sided box open on the front. I usually add a cover to the top to take out the light shining down from the ceiling. And then when I place a light on my setup, I have virtually one light source and the strongest possibility of creating a dynamic and powerful composition. The more I control and restrict the light, the stronger shadow pattern I'll create. The point of this is that most still life painters strive to create an arrangement like this so they have complete control of the light. In the landscape, the painter has no control of the light and no control of the fact that there's more than one light source. Unfortunately, we can't eliminate the second light source from the landscape. We can't turn off the sky. And when we turn off the sun, you can see the result of that any night. The moon is a poor light source and a reflector of light at that. It has no light of its own. It's so weak as a light source that none of its light is captured in the sky to be reflected to Earth. With no secondary light source, there's no seeing into the shadows of things. So right away, we're working on two entirely different premises between landscape and still life. Landscape deals with two light sources, and still life deals with only one light source. These differences not only affect the value of the masses, they also affect color, the subject of still another program entitled Light and Shadow, which will explore the effects of different types of light on the colors found in light and shadow masses. Let's begin with the visual language of the landscape with respect to values. Light, medium, and dark are much easier to understand than color effects. What's confusing to the painter is the fact that everything we see is in color. So we have to have some way of disregarding color so that we can understand what we see. Representing a complex subject with simplicity is what we want to do. So let's begin by simplifying. The white of the canvas or drawing pad is used to represent the sources of light from both the sun and the sky. The most usual placement of landscape elements indicates that the sun is positioned off the canvas in one direction or the other, either right, left, or overhead. Although the sky itself has color and value, unless the sky is the center of interest, it's best represented in a drawing as a blank white mass. Shown in this manner, we intuitively know that it is sky. The next lightest value in the landscape, light value, is indicative of something that not only receives a lot of light, but also reflects a lot of light. Consider this. If you shine a light directly onto a surface, under what circumstances will that surface reflect back most of its light toward the light source? The answer is when that surface is perpendicular to or facing the light source. Welcome to Illuminations, a program of study designed to guide you through the basic tools one needs to become a better painter. We intend to shed light on the theories, tools, and techniques that provide this foundation. Many of the subjects we will explore seem to confuse even experienced painters when they're trying to do everything at once. Every stroke applied to a painting must exhibit the knowledge of composition, color, value, edge, linear, and aerial perspective. That's a tall order for a beginner, yet that's exactly what many try to do when they start painting. Actually, all of these concepts are simple to understand when they're studied out of the context of trying to execute a painting. Join me for the entire Illumination series for a good basic introduction to the theory, tools, methods, and techniques every painter can use. Horizontal lines are passive and imply stability, solidity, and stillness. We see these in landscape forms of flat fields, distant vistas, and ocean horizons. The vertical line is authoritative, suggesting power, reverence, or awe. These qualities can be found in trees, architecture, and barriers. The diagonal line represents movement or rhythm and can be found on any of the earth planes. The closer the diagonal is to horizontal, the slower and calmer the movement. The steeper the angle of the diagonal, the faster the speed of the line and more tension that is created. Everything you put into a painting has a direction of movement, so you're using the properties of these elements whether you intend to or not. Better that you be in control of them than be controlled by them. So how can you use line? 1. Create a calm, serene feeling with horizontal lines. 2. Create excitement, movement, and rhythm with diagonal lines. 3. Create power and tension with vertical lines. And 4, create the illusion of living things with the curved line. We usually think of a pencil when the tools of drawing are required. It's the cheapest and most available, and one of the most expressive of drawing mediums. A soft 6B pencil is what I'll use today because I can make dark values more easily with it. I'll use paint for some of the demonstrations today, just to emphasize that drawing is a painter's tool. The flat plane of the ground is the greatest receiver of light in the landscape. Not only does it receive the direct light of the sun, but it also receives much of the light reflected back to Earth from the sky. See the difference? It's not the local color or value that makes it dark in value. It's the tree's relationship to the light and the angle that we view the tree that makes the value appear as a dark when it's upright. On the ground, the leaf becomes part of the more brightly lit ground plane and it almost disappears. This is a real-life example of perspective from above. These cottages are below our vantage point. When we point up the angles, we see that all the parallel lines point to a vanishing point off the picture plane. This ruined fragment of a church is seen entirely from below, and all its horizontal planes point downward. First, notice that the value of the light objects are reflected darker. The White House is much lighter in value than its reflection, and the detail in the ivy, with respect to its color, is totally lost in the reflection. Also, notice the value of the sky reflected in the water. All the values in this reflection are dark because of our angle of view. We're looking down on the whole scene. Our eye level is even with the top windows on the red ivy-colored house, because we're pretty high up on the riverbank. As a result, we're seeing down into the depths of the water, which is causing all the reflected values to be quite dark. The concepts presented in this program will hopefully give you new thoughts on viewing potential subject matter. To begin the practice of drawing, forget color and forget size. Get down to a manageable size with your sketchbook or canvas and do just value studies. You'll improve your conception of all your work by practicing simplification. Draw with a great big brush so that you don't get bogged down in detail. It'll prevent you from going down that road. Say it as simply as you can, with as few masses as you can, in as few values as you can. A value sketch is to the painter as the outline is to the writer. It keeps everything in mind so that you focus on the important points. By now you must realize the way a painter draws is different than the way a linear draftsman draws. Drawing as an art form in itself is also concerned with the arrangement of values of the masses, but it focuses on detail far more than the painter needs to do. Fine drawings in pencil, charcoal, and ink are just as expressive as paintings, but as painters, we can dispense with much of the fine detail and rendering that line drawing is suited for. We have something the draftsman doesn't have: color. Color can take the place of minutely drawn details, and your paintings based on simple masses will prove that beyond a doubt. Please join me in other programs in the Illumination series for further study of drawing concepts that we haven't touched on today. In Drawing 2 for Painters, I'll delve into drawing as it applies to still life, but I'll return to the landscape in discussion on composition and elements of good design. Another entire program in the series is devoted to the study of drawing trees in all their shapes and forms. I hope that you've enjoyed this program and that you'll join me in future releases to study other basic concepts and theories in the wonderful art of painting. Until we meet again, enjoy drawing.
Well, that was Drawing for Painters with Johnnie Liliedahl. It's a classic, and you can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. Remember, we have a special discount code in the comments section. Thanks for watching. Bye.